What is today Latin America was once many native nations. Spain, Portugal, France, England, the Dutch and Danish invaded. They carried out genocide after genocide and enslaved both natives and Africans. After independence, most new governments were still white-dominated, with more genocides against natives in nations like Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. European powers hold on to some territories even today and kept invading to take their colonies back. The United States invaded too, overthrowing or trying to overthrow over 60 governments. The last attempt in the year 2020 in Venezuela. The U.S. also took half of Mexico's land and a tenth of its people, and then Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. There is a long history of many Americans fearing and hating Latinos. Latin America's image and reality is often one of instability, poverty, drug cartels, revolutions, corruptions, and refugees. But it did not have to be this way. Latin America could remain all or mostly native nations. I spoke about this in detail in the previous series, What If Natives Won? Poverty, white domination, and foreign invasions could have been stopped, prevented, or limited. The U.S. could have been more Latino culturally, with higher numbers of Latinos. The U.S. could have been less racist, less dominating, or the U.S. could be defeated. Some Latin American nations could even become regional or world powers. There's a huge lack of alternate history about Latin America and Latinos. So much alternate history is Europe-centered, mostly because so much history and history teaching is Europe-centered. This series is dedicated to scenarios, points of departure, and possibilities of Latin American victory within Latin America and a more Latino or less racist American society. My name is Carroll. I'm Associate Professor of History at Northern Virginia Community College. I've written mostly about wars, veterans, human rights, and genocide. My next history book will be Genocide Denial in America, about the 7 genocides against indigenous people that took place in the U.S. that most people were never taught about, don't know, or deny. I've also written some science fiction, mostly alternate history. One story, Timely Saviors, appears in a short story collection, The Witness Paradox. I'm also, together with Rob Schmidt of Bluecorn Comics, editing and putting out a short story alternate history collection, What If Natives Won? I've also written a sci-fi alternate history book, The Man in Black, the first of a series. This is a video imagining a different Latin American independence, an earlier one, and one led by those other than the long-standing European ancestry but American-born elites. The first video imagined an earlier revolt in Mexico. The second imagined a revolt in Peru and Bolivia. This one imagines a revolt in Gran Colombia, what became Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Panama, and small parts of Brazil. The Wayuu people are today on the border of Colombia and Venezuela, near the Caribbean coast. They number around 750,000 people. Spanish invaders never completely conquered them, in part because they adopted guns and horses quickly. They revolted against Spain 6 times. In 1701, when they destroyed a mission, 1727, 1741, 1757, 1761, and the last time that we will discuss, 1768. The 1768 revolt had 20,000 Wayuus fighting the Spaniards by some estimates. They were armed with guns by British and Dutch smugglers, and perhaps Spaniards too. Most Spanish towns in the area were destroyed and hundreds of Spaniards killed. By most accounts, what ended the revolt was not Spaniards. They sent only 100 troops. Wayuu leaders divided among themselves. One of the Spanish commanders, José de Sierra, was of mixed Wayuu ancestry, and his death led to his Wayuu relatives fighting the rebels. If de Sierra escaped alive or was captured, the revolt goes much farther. The next big revolt in New Granada, what became Gran Colombia, was the Comuneros, only 13 years later. It was Criollo, European ancestry born in America, led, but a widespread popular movement. Spain's Bourbon reform, loss of power for Criollos, royal monopolies, and high taxes caused the revolt. By some accounts, up to 20,000 rebels marched on Bogota. They defeated a Spanish army. Then the governor signed an agreement to their demands, and they disbanded. More soldiers arrived and enforced the laws. The remaining rebel leaders were executed or imprisoned. Obviously, not disbanding means the rebellion lasts longer and may succeed. The next early revolt is well known to every Colombian student and to many Latin Americans. The 1810 to 1816 period, called Patria Boba, or Foolish Fatherland, the rebels in New Granada successfully defeated Spanish forces, and then they split into several rival groups, each local set of elites setting up their own local self-rule. By their infighting, Spanish troops were able to reconquer the territory and defeat the rebels. The early defeat of the rebels meant it took later leaders like Simón Bolívar another 7 years to liberate Gran Colombia from Spanish colonialism. After that, Bolívar and Gran Colombia's prestige was such that independence movements in Cuba, Santo Domingo, later called the Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico declared their desires to be associated states tied to Gran Colombia. And after that, Gran Colombia and Peru went to war over the status of Bolivia. Gran Colombia won and gained territory, but the conflict led to it breaking apart. That war was the closest Latin America ever came to being united. Potentially, any of these three early rebellions succeeding could lead to it, a Gran Colombia that could be today's Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Panama, Peru, Bolivia, Cuba, Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico, all united. Such an enormous nation could be in conflict with Mexico over the rest of Central America, meaning if they win, Gran Colombia might include what became Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. All of this would depend most of all on Latin America's criollos either being defeated early by the Wayuu or by the criollos being willing to share power with mestizos, natives, and blacks, as they did in the Comunero revolt, and on them being willing to set aside a petty desire for local power, which they did not do during Patria Boba. It would take very skilled leaders and much luck, and criollos being willing to break down a caste system that benefited them. But if Gran Colombia somehow does overcome all these obstacles, succeeds in staying united, it would today be enormously powerful. It would today be over 200 million people with enormous resources. A united, powerful nation would be able to fight off most or all American invasions, coups, coup attempts, and other tyranny and attempts to control, exploit, and subvert them. It likely would be a rival to the U.S., and there might have been a full-scale war between them at some point. If Gran Colombia's initial elites were willing to share power and allow a more equal society, that might be enough to bring a more prosperous and industrial society sooner, enabling the U.S.'s defeat. Certainly the U.S. rise as an imperial power would be far different, and so, too, would be the Cold War, assuming it still happens. This is the end of the 5th video. I look forward to your comments and questions. We'll answer them as soon as I can. Please repost freely, like, quote, and comment. This has been Latin American Victory. Next time we will discuss what if Louisiana Territory is part of Mexico.